10 settlements and cities that met a horrible fate. Not all cities are destined for greatness. Some experience catastrophe, either man-made or natural. Some of those are rebuilt, while others are lost or abandoned. Today, I'll be looking at 10 settlements and cities that met a less than appealing fate at some point in their history. Before I get started, don't forget to make sure you're subscribed to my channel so you receive updates about new videos. Now let's get started. Number 10. Chan, Peru. Once South America's largest city from the pre-Columbian era, it also served as the capital of the historic empire of the Shimor. Composed of 10,000 structures with walls as high as 30 feet, temples and palaces were adorned with elaborate friezes hundreds of feet tall. The city's location made water scarce, but this industrious city surveyed the land and built a massive canal through the foothill terrain between two valleys. Additional irrigation canals and wells let the city flourish for some time. Their demise did not come from an inability to adapt to the landscape. Instead, they were conquered by the Inca, breaking up the Chimu Empire. Many of the city's artisans were brought to the Inca capital, Cusco, 600 miles away. By the time Spanish conquistador Francisco Pizarro arrived in 1532, the city had been mostly abandoned. Number 9. Berlin. Berlin, the capital of Nazi Germany during the Second World War, was bombed repeatedly between 1940 and 1945 by Allied forces and Soviet forces. The city saw over 45,000 tons of bombs from British bombers, with American aircraft adding 23,000 more tons. The Battle of Berlin, launched in 1943, comprised 16 mass attacks on Berlin over 4 months. America's largest raid on Berlin took place in 1945 and was so dense that it caused a city fire that, driven by wind, lasted for 4 days until everything combustible in its range was reduced to ashes. By the time all the bombings had taken place, more than 40% of the city's inhabitants had fled. Of course, the city has since been rebuilt, with many museums dedicated to the war, the Berlin Wall, bombings, and the city's complicated history. Number 8. San Francisco. Early on April 18, 1906, a massive quake dealt incredible damage to San Francisco, California. The quake's deadliness was compounded by the lack of understanding of earthquake mechanics. The quake ruptured nearly 300 miles of the San Andreas Fault and was foreshadowed by a foreshock at 5:12 a.m., felt throughout the San Francisco Bay Area. Just 25 seconds later, the main earthquake shook the area for nearly a minute, felt from southern Oregon to the south of Los Angeles and as far inland as central Nevada. It would have registered as 7.7 and 8.3 on today's Richter scale. With hundreds of unrecorded deaths in Chinatown, it's impossible to know the total number of deaths. Estimates come up with a range of 700 to over 3,000. As many as 300,000 were left homeless out of a population of 410,000. Damage secondary to the quake included long-lasting fires due to gas lines that had ruptured and continued burning and were responsible for up to 90% of the destruction. The fire cost an estimated $350 million at that time, equivalent to more than $7.75 billion today. As the city rebuilt, one benefit included the creation of the Auxiliary Water Supply System (AWSS), a distinct water supply reserved for fire protection use only, and now has 150 miles of dedicated mains and 1,550 special hydrants. Number 7. London. As the largest city in Britain and the national capital, it made for a favorite target of the German Air Force between 1940 and 1945. In a German bombing campaign against the United Kingdom, the Blitz saw 71 separate raids across London, with 18,000 tons of high explosives hitting the city. The campaign killed nearly 30,000 Londoners and left another 50,000 seriously injured. Hundreds of thousands of people found themselves homeless, with tens of thousands of buildings destroyed. Thankfully, museums and libraries took action to send important mobile documents and artifacts to the countryside for preservation. School children, teachers, and caregivers were evacuated to outlying districts until it was deemed safe to return. Number 6. Indonesia. Sumatra-Andaman Earthquake, 2004. The third largest earthquake ever recorded caused massive damage to multiple communities, so I'm not discussing just one city for this entry. The Indian Ocean earthquake was an undersea megathrust earthquake registered 9.1 to 9.3 on the Richter scale. As a result, a series of massive tsunami waves grew up to 100 feet high and rippled outward, hitting Indonesia, Sri Lanka, Thailand, India, the Maldives, Myanmar, Somalia, and other locations. Within all the affected areas, it's estimated that over 250,000 people died, making this one of the 10 worst earthquakes in recorded history. Indonesia topped the list with 170,000 deaths. Reconstruction efforts have greatly helped many of the impacted areas in the years since the earthquake, although nothing will replace the lives lost that day. Number 5. Iram of the Pillars. One of the more obscure entries on this list, this City of Pillars is considered a lost city, region, or tribe mentioned in the Quran. Although written text tells us that a sandstorm buried the city, a more interesting fate befell the settlement. In 1993, the remains of a settlement were found in an area consistent with the legendary lost city. It is most likely that much of the settlement collapsed into a massive sinkhole that hosted a well. It might have been exacerbated by groundwater being sucked up by the surrounding oasis. Number 4. Lake Nyos, Cameroon. Sounding like something out of a creepy work of fiction, a rare event caused the death of 1,746 people and 3,500 livestock in 1986. This event wiped out multiple villages within 16 miles of Lake Nyos in Africa. A limnic eruption at the lake released somewhere between 100,000 and 300,000 tons of carbon dioxide. This type of eruption involves dissolved carbon dioxide found at the bottom of some bodies of water, suddenly mixing with upper levels and erupting out of the lake. Because of the heaviness of carbon dioxide, it descended into the nearby villages, suffocating people and livestock. After the eruption, the lake's water turned red due to the iron-rich water from the deep rising to the surface and being oxidized. The lake's level lowered by 1 meter and nearby trees were knocked down. The outgassing trigger is unknown, but geologists suspect a landslide, a small volcanic eruption on the lake bed, or even a small earthquake. Since no survivors existed to say what happened in the moments before, it may remain a mystery. Number 3. Hiroshima. One of the most infamous moments of human history was the first time a nuclear weapon was used to target a city. Hiroshima was the unlucky recipient of this honor. Bombed by US forces in 1945, most of the city was destroyed. Up to 166,000 people had died by the end of the year. Fewer than 10% of the direct casualties were military. The following month, the city was struck by a typhoon to add insult to the injury, adding more than 3,000 additional deaths to the tally. Hiroshima was rebuilt after the war and is now the capital of Hiroshima Prefecture in Japan, with a population of more than 1.2 million. Number 2. Pompeii, Italy. Pompeii is one of the multiple ill-fated cities that got a little too comfy with their neighbors. Nestled in the shadow of Mount Vesuvius, the city could do nothing to stop its destruction by the volcano that erupted in 79 AD. The volcano dumped up to 20 feet of pumice and volcanic ash on the city, freezing its inhabitants in place. Many are frozen, curled up, and huddled together, trying to protect themselves from impending doom. The city was extremely prosperous leading up to its destruction, and by the time the city met its demise, it had reached a booming population of 20,000. Number 1. Jerusalem. Perhaps the most hotly contested land area in the world, Jerusalem has suffered constant violence. Sieges have taken place throughout its history, as early as 701 BCE and another 22 times throughout its existence. It has been attacked 52 times, recaptured 44 times, and destroyed entirely twice. That's a lot of violence for one of the oldest cities in the world. Political and religious conflicts have motivated much of the brutality. The area has yet to see any prolonged peace, and it's anticipated that violence will continue in the area for the foreseeable future. I hope you enjoyed today's list. Were there any catastrophes you weren't aware of before watching this video? What moment of destruction did I miss? Let me know in the comments below. Before you leave, don't forget to like this video if you found it entertaining or informative, and I'll see you guys next time.